Thank you, and thank you, all of you, for joining us. I just love to see everyone involved. Today we're going to take a look at the Hudson River School. And it isn't a school per se. This word school just simply implies a style that about 25 or more artists in the middle of the 1800s became involved with. The Hudson River School is a mid-19th century American art movement. It was a small group of landscape painters influenced by Romanticism, which is painting with emotions and beauty, and that was a European influence. What I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about what was going on in the mid-1800s, because artists are influenced by social and cultural movements and the era they live in. And then we'll move on to taking a look at about 6 of these artists' photographs. I think it's always important to take a look at the people who are painting. And then we'll move on to about 12 images. When we go through them, I'm going to start talking about what the themes were in the 1800s, discovery, exploration, and settlement through all the paintings, and what the 3 expert techniques were that the artists use: atmosphere, scale, and shadow. And there are words associated with it. So as we move on, I'll lean on you to take a look at the images and say, yes, I see what the atmospheric effect is. I see the shadow. I see the scale that they use. So you begin to learn what kind of paintings the Hudson River School artists created. So that's the prelude. The period of art was from about 1825 to 1875. Sandwiched in there was quite a bit of American history. In the 1700s, the wilderness was feared in America, and the wilderness was not regarded, the beauty was not regarded with distinction. But by the 1820s, settlement in the United States was well underway, and pioneers and developers, if you will, were pushing westward. In the 1800s, in the early 1800s, there was really no art movement in the United States. People who were artists were commissioned to do portraits of wealthy people. And you saw the landscape behind the portrait. It was usually gnarly trees or something of a homestead scene, but that was considered landscape. It was primarily portraiture. Then by about 1830, the American School of Landscape emerged and art museums emerged. Prior to about 1830, there was no place for artists to exhibit, present their art, show their art. There was no collection of artists coming together. But they began to create work for the middle class. It went from portraiture to wealthy people requesting or commissioning more of the grand European stylized art. And then it moved away towards paintings for the middle class who wanted paintings over their fireplace. And this is about 1830. And this, I'm giving you a punctuation of what was going on, because that was the 1800s was a jam-packed period. It was a radiant century of science, inventions, discoveries, and universal laws. Too big for just this 1 hour. Writers began to publish in the early 1800s about their travels through the wilderness, and it caught the attention of people who wanted to become tourists and who wanted to see some of these expansive landscapes that were being talked about in the literature. Now, the European landscapes were pastoral, whereas the American landscapes began to depict wilderness. We can move on to that PDF where we show the artists, and I'll talk a little bit about the artist's influence at the time. Geology was the most important field of scientific inquiry in the mid 1800s. Theories of creation, the Earth's age, and understanding scientific theories was prevalent. People started to explore caves above and below the Earth's surface. And three names come to mind as we talk about influences on life in the early or mid 1800s. Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, which described the evolution of nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote Nature in 1836, using nature for communicating with God. And Henry David Thoreau wrote Walden Pond at the time. And that was about natural history and an environment. So what's happening is science is coming together with the intellectual writings about transcendental meditation from Emerson and Thoreau, along with the wonder of our Earth, with studies in geography and geology. So that influenced these people. What you see is a map of the Hudson River Valley. The paintings takes place in the Hudson River Valley, the Catskills, the Adirondacks, and the White Mountain areas. Underneath the map is artist Susie M. Barstow, and we'll talk more about her. Women artists were non-regarded at this time. It wasn't until 2010, 10 years ago, that a small museum in upstate New York created an exhibit for who were the women of the Hudson River School. Thomas Cole was the founder of the Hudson River School. Edwin Church was a student. Albert Bierstadt was a magnificent artist who started to move out west as civilization moved out towards the Rocky Mountains, and we'll take a look at some of his paintings. But these artists were caught between individuals the populace who wanted to explore and take care of the earth and the wilderness, and those who conquered it, who wanted to develop it. But the artists who captured some of the most magnificent landscape images were integral in creating parks and influencing the national park system. So they played an important role. Asher Brown Durand is a key figure in this Hudson River School movement. And there are very few Black artists, but we're going to take a look at Robert Selden Duncanson, who was in Cincinnati artist. So we'll go on now to our first painting. Which is by Thomas Cole, the founder of the Hudson River School, and the painting is called The Oxbow, and it was created in 1836. 1836 means we haven't yet had the Civil War. Development is taking place in New York, which is the hub of the Cultural Center. So Thomas Cole marks the beginning of the Hudson River School, and his early paintings of nature untouched human development and reinforced the notion of America as an Eden, a Garden of Eden. This site is a bend in the Connecticut River, and it's called the Oxbow, which is what that the water is. There are three themes in mid-1800 America painters for the painters in the Hudson River School. It was discovery, exploration, and settlement. And we'll keep talking about that as we look at these paintings. And there were three techniques that they used: atmosphere, scale, and shadow. So as I go through some of these notes here, I want to point out what we're looking at with this painting. A conflict between wilderness and civilization, was a dominant theme in Cole's work. It's portrayed in the contrast between the dense, stormy sky that you see on the left and the kind of sunlit, cultivated plains on the right. The two worlds are bridged by the artist's vision. He is in the picture. He's in here showing himself at work, declaring that the artist can be a visionary in harmony with nature. Can you see him? Can you see Thomas Cole painting?
Yeah, I think he's down there in the bottom middle, maybe
Right.
some umbrellas for shade.
Right, and over to the right would be his backpack, his knapsack, and an umbrella. So he tucked himself into the painting. Each of the two halves of the paintings could stand as a complete composition. What is being presented here, and we'll find this throughout the painter's projections in this style, is that the storm clouds and lightning split tree remind the viewer of the ultimate power of nature, yet man is still part of it. Some of the words associated with this particular style would be quietly mysterious, contemplative, fragile beauty, gnarled branches of dead trees, delicate atmospheric effects. And what that means is that the artist used the atmosphere to deliver perspective. In the background, you have the light gray stormy clouds. And the further away the hillside is, the less definitive it is. In the middle ground, where you see that round patch of earth, you begin to see some trees. And then you come to the foreground, and you begin to see the gnarled branches on the tree and more of a leaf structure and more of a delineation of the rockery. So they're using this projection of atmospheric effect where the background is washed out to gain perspective. And let's take a look at number 2. This is also Thomas Cole, the founder of this Hudson River School, and he's painting in the Catskill Mountains. Again, the theme for the painters of the Hudson River School is discovery, exploration, and settlement. They were in love with nature. Many of them were very religious and associated nature with God, communicating with God. This is a particularly interesting painting of Thomas Cole. There's a story behind this. It depicts the site of an earlier landslide whose destruction prompted the victims, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Wiley, their 5 children, and 2 farmhands who were caught in a landslide avalanche in what's called the Crawford Notch, which is that V that you see in the background. They left the area and they thought they found safe haven close by in the little inn that you see in the left-hand side of the picture. However, it was only a temporary refuge, and the avalanche came through the notch. A rescue party arrived the next day to try and find them, but it could only find the bodies of the mother and father and 2 children, but the farmhands and the rest of the children were never found. So the Crawford Notch is thought to allude to this dramatic and tragic episode of man's frailty against the forces of nature. We'll take a look at what's inside this painting. The scene in many ways appears very calm and serene, but a man on a black horse rides along a path kind of zigzagging through the picture. 2 figures and a dog kind of stand outside the well-known house inn. So I don't know if we can get close up, but you see the house way back in the left corner. In front of that yellow tree are 2 children and a dog. And then if you turn your eyes to the right, you see 2 trunks of a tree and a white kind of blob off to the right. That's a stagecoach about to pass through the notch. There's evidence of nature's obstructive potential everywhere in the painting. The twisted trees in the foreground, the skeletal kind of gestured dead trees in the middle distance. You see them limbless and without leaves. You see the dark sweeping storm clouds in the upper left. It's the scale of man in comparison to the natural scenery and the elements that conveys nature's power. And you're going to see this throughout the paintings of the Hudson River School. Man is venturing into nature, and nature is very powerful. It cannot be tamed, and it always seems to overshadow mankind's achievements. So the theme in this that Thomas Cole intended is the struggle between man and nature. And it really was a dominant theme in Romanticism, this struggle between beauty and power. Again, there are certain words that come out when we take a look at these paintings, and I want you to, as we move along, kind of embrace these words, and you'll begin to tell me what's in these paintings as we go forward. European was pastoral and landscape. American art was much more of depicting wildness and the wilderness areas. Sublime storms, quiet, mysterious, contemplative, fragile beauty. Gnarled branches, dead trees, delicate atmospheric effects. And that means that the sky in the background creates a hazy film over faraway mountains and hillsides, almost creating the same tonality in the color palette. We'll see virgin forests, lakes, and waterfalls. We'll also see how the artist used light to kind of create a symbolic divine light. Forest interiors become natural sanctuaries in many of these paintings. This is the story of an avalanche coming through the notch where people thought they were safe, and they're not. Can you see that? Want to go to the next one? These are two of Thomas Cole's, and now we go on to a student of Thomas Cole's, Frederick Edwin Church. And this one is Niagara Falls. Again, the theme for the mid 1800s by the Hudson River School was discovery, exploration, and settlement. And we're going to see that throughout all of the paintings. They used atmosphere as an effect, scale, and shadow. At the time, Niagara Falls was considered the greatest natural wonder of America, superior to anything the Europeans created. It symbolized nation's youth and a vigorous promise. Frederick Edwin Church presented Niagara Falls after making about 70 oil painting sketches before creating this. Atmosphere, shadow, scale. You see the far background. Think of this as a middle ground and then a foreground by simply cutting the image into thirds. So what are we looking at in this amazing picture? It's a grand scale on a long canvas, creating a panoramic effect and heightening the illusion of reality. The aerial distance perspective and creating or cascading water does create drama. This is taking place on the Canadian shore side, and it's called Horseshoe Falls. The sky is violet. There's a misty rainbow hue. It's conveying a sense of mystery. You, the viewer, are poised above the brink of the falls, feeling the exhilaration and awe looking at it. There's a drama created by this horseshoe shape and the falling mass of water. The front or the foreground, Frederick Church pushed down, revealing the far side and the dramatic rush of water. So he changed the perspective. Can you see it's lower in the front? So you could see into that waterfall. By eliminating this foreground, he created a psychological sensation of you being suspended over the torrent itself. So some of the words that come to mind that we're talking about associated with this school of art is fragile, powerful, mysterious, delicate atmospheric effects. The background or the hills are far in the distance and you can't see them. They almost merge with the same tonality of the paint of the sky. He presents the falls as a symbol of power and energy of the New World. It was the most frequently painted American natural wonder at the time. Visitors flocked to the Niagara Falls, anticipating both an emotional and really a spiritual experience. Church unveiled this painting, which is 7 feet long and 3 feet high. So it's very large. He unveiled it in an exhibition in New York, and he pioneered the idea of art as an event. He illuminated it with gas lights. He included binoculars and a kind of optical aids for people viewing it. People could purchase copies of it in a pamphlet or in a painting. He had more than 100,000 people come and pay a quarter to just see the painting. And the painting itself toured American cities, Great Britain, and then was in the Great Exposition in Paris. Technical brilliance, extraordinary illusion. This painting created for Frederick Church a reputation that celebrated him above all other Hudson River School painters, and you can see why. I suspect it's beautiful up front. Niagara Falls, painted in 1857, a vista from the Canadian shore and its Horseshoe Falls. And now we can move on to the next one of Church. So we're looking at 2 of them by Frederick Edwin Church. This one is called Sunset. And in the theme of discovery and exploration and settlement, sunset brings the viewer to the farthest reaches of man's kind of penetration into the American West. He was a master at sunsets. It's an eloquent expression of American space and American light. He is traveling westward as pioneers move over the Mississippi out to the West Coast. And this is a very good painting showing atmosphere, scale, and shadow, the 3 techniques of the Hudson painters. The further away you are from where you're standing, the more this huge peak becomes the same color as this velvety sky, almost indiscernible. As you move forward into the middle ground, the hillsides are still not really discernible. There's really not too much depth in the water, but he is showing shadows to create this illusion of perspective. And then as we come into our foreground, we see the leaves on the trees, and we see the gnarled branches of the dead tree and of this forlorn-looking pine tree. The rockery and the path also has form and shape as he gives more detail in the foreground, less in the middle ground, and allows this atmospheric effect where something in the far background almost becomes part of the sky. The mountain is huge, but almost invisible. Again, no detail in the lake, but shadows. The viewer looks to the sky where the receding clouds lead to the distant peaks. So he's using this color to take us into the picture. We're made aware of the vastness of the American space through the light and atmosphere. It is quietly mysterious. He has delicate atmosphere effects. It is serene, and it is contemplative. And he is using rays of sunlight or the sunset as kind of an impression of divine light. And this would be a good one, as Susan is saying, to look up Frederick Edwin Church and to see how he progressed from early Hudson River School paintings to his final paintings at the end of the century. So this is number 4. Now let's move to the next artist, Asher Brown Durand. And he was also affiliated very closely with the founder, Thomas Cole and Frederick Church. This particular one is called Kindred Spirits, and it was painted in 1849. This particular one does play very much into discovery, exploration, and settlement of the Hudson River School. Durand was a student of Thomas Cole. And if you were just to look at this painting, you'd say, oh, I just see 2 men standing on a cliff, apparently enjoying the hillside. But Asher Brown Durand painted this in celebration of the early death of Thomas Cole. The gentleman on the left is the poet William Cullen Bryant, and the gentleman on the right is Thomas Cole. And William Cullen Bryant gave the eulogy for Cole's funeral at the time. So this is a painting to celebrate this relationship. It's called Kindred Spirits, and it was also to celebrate these 2 gentlemen's absolute love for nature. Bryant in capturing it in poetry, and Cole capturing it on paint with paint. It takes place in the Catskill Mountains. It's a memory piece. It's based on the painter Asher Brown Durand's memory of the Catskill Mountains. He painted this in a studio without being on site. It was just his memory of it. We experience in this particular painting atmosphere, scale, and shadow. We see in the background how we're drawn to the atmospheric effect of the sky and how it spills over into the light, hazy, misty hillsides that are not discernible. And then we move into this middle ground again where you begin to see 2 waterfalls and the illusion of trees. And then he takes us all the way into the foreground where you begin to see fragile beauty, natural rock formations, gnarled branches. The foremost tree actually if you were to look this up, would have the initials of the two gentlemen that Bryant carved into the tree. There are no hard angular lines. He used shapes, light, and color, and one-point perspective to give the illusion of depth. So the one-point perspective is the stream going back to that waterfall. And if you were to draw radiating lines coming out from that point all the way to the ends of the picture, everything from the outside in gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And everything coming out takes more shape and has more delineation. The two waterfalls are designed to draw the viewer toward the hazy sunlit hills. Some of the words associated with this particular painting: delicate atmospheric effect, fragile beauty, natural rock formations, gnarled branches. By painting this particular scene, Asher Brown Durant kind of codified, or for history, created a visual record of the relationship between the art and the literary circles of the 19th century. Kindred spirits has kind of come to symbolize both the Hudson River School and the era of culture, or Emerson, Thoreau, and the poets of the time who wrote about the relationship man had with nature. This particular painting is in the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. And Alice Walton bought this painting at auction for $35 million to put into this museum. It must have touched her deeply. Any thoughts about this one? I'm curious to know, the sensory qualities are very, we're halfway through. The sensory qualities are evident in the Hudson River School. So if you were to look at Hudson River paintings, you would recognize certain qualities. You would recognize this atmospheric effect. And what is that? Can anyone jump in? What does the atmospheric effect mean in this particular painting?
You're referring to like the haze and, you know, that kind of like early morning fog maybe that you get when.
Right. It's a technique that artists use to create perspective. Otherwise, it's just simply flat.
Right.
What about the words fragile beauty? Now, the artist meant it in two ways. One, humanity's sense that they are to conquer the earth. The lovers of nature's sense that they must protect the earth. Fragile beauty. Can you see it here? Does it come through in some way?
I notice the two men are dressed as gentlemen, not more as hikers or casual, but almost look like they have ties on too, you know, around their necks. I can't tell what that one man's holding.
Very good. That's a great observation.
Yeah, that's delicate to me.
Mm-hmm.
Surrounded by trees that are curved up on top, and then the bottom they're more, you know, maybe broken, and as you would see in a timber or forest.
Mm-hmm.
And I see two birds flying.
You do? Oh, there they are. That's right. Oh, and there's one in front of the cliff. Good observation. I didn't see that one earlier.
And also, I don't know if precipice is the right word, but where they're standing, if I saw that, I wouldn't want to stand on the end of that. And they're not.
Well, it makes you wonder where Asher Brown Durant was standing.
And I wonder how those two gentlemen got to that point. I don't see any horses or, I mean, did they hike? I
Yes.
doubt it.
I think many people hiked in.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, but they're not dressed like for hikers.
No, you're
That's
right.
100 though.
You're right. So since Asher Brown Durant was not at this locality, and he more or less just put together images,
Right.
he probably took
Right.
liberty and put shoes on these people. Let's move on to number 6. This is the same artist, Asher Brown Durant, and this painting is called Landscape, and he made this one in 1850. Can you see how often we would look at a painting like this and think, it's just too old, I'm not interested? In my years, I've run across old paintings this way, and I don't know that I really appreciated and realized that these were artists who were making a statement saying, we have to save the earth, let's take a look at it. There's beauty here. And this was a time of soul searching in the mid-1800s. This painting is called Landscape. It was painted 2 years after the founder of the Hudson River School's death. And you can see that all these artists painted alike. They had a theme. They worked with the atmospheric effect of hazy clouds and a hazy hillside, with almost the background merging into the sky. They had a middle ground that was not defined well, and then they had a foreground that gave you much more information. And that technique enabled us to have perspective, to go into the painting. 2 large trees are presented, one a black birch and another sycamore here. The stream falls off a cliff and then winds down through a valley toward the sunny area in the distance. There is a squirrel on a rock somewhere in the painting. There is a loneliness of the scene. The critiques of this particular painting indicated. The Hudson River painters often reflected the transcendental philosophy of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who believed that all of nature bore testimony to a spiritual truth that could be understood through personal intuition, be reflective. Some of the words associated with this particular painting: serene, lyrical, contemplative, delicate lighting in a woodland, the forest interior as a natural sanctuary. Asher Brown Durant was a botanist. If we were to take a look at this painting close up, and others of his, which you should do, he was almost a photographic painter of caves and the dirt underneath rocks. He was impeccable in his rendition of the earth. Before he became a landscape painter, he was an engraver, and his first major commission in 1820 as an engraver before he became a painter was to make an engraving of the Declaration of Independence. So now that we've learned a little bit about the style of these paintings and the words associated with atmosphere, scale, and shadow, do you have any kind of reactions of some of the words we're using to this particular painting, anyone?
And I think you find interesting with him and Thomas Cole is how the light seems to go from dark to light, from one side to the other. For instance, you go the dark trees on the right over the light on the left. And, you know, normally I'm used to looking at landscapes as very balanced, you know, like you said, those three sections, top, middle, bottom. And these almost, I don't want to call it imbalanced, but maybe are they trying to give you a sense, just put you off a bit, give you a feeling of that the, you know, the unknown of nature kind of give you a little bit of disquieting feeling?
I think so. What kind of impression do those two gentlemen, one reclining and one standing up, kind of tucked away in the middle of nature, give you? What would they be doing?
I think it has kind of a pastoral feeling to it. The one man is reclining. They look casual. It does have a tranquil feeling to me, and I think it's interesting that the two men are almost in the center of the painting. And your eye goes right there to the men, and then you kind of travel out to the left to the landscape and the sky and on that portion of it. But it looks very tranquil to me. It's very pleasing. I think you said sensual.
To me, it doesn't feel tranquil at all. It feels more disquieting. Like, I don't know if it was Priscilla who said that. It feels like in the forest, there could be danger lurking, and how far away they are from being able to get any help. That's my impression of the darker, shadowy part of the forest. It is disquieting, I find it.
And Helen, you caught one of the intents of Asher Brown Durand in the painting, and that is conflict. So in the foreground, you have the serenity of this woodland, wilderness, but what's happening in the background with mankind's civilization overtaking it. So you barely see the city growing up, encroaching, coming after, and then he gives you this natural sanctuary. So there is meant to be a juxtaposition of the power of man taking over and the power of nature, and who will win.
And I question whether or not that's a man sitting on the ground, because it seems like that he or she has long hair. So I'm wondering if it's perhaps a woman dressed in an outfit for hiking or riding or something like that.
And also there's a red cloth on the ground there by the man or woman that's, reclined. And then the other gentleman has something under his arm, his left arm, like he's carrying, whether it's an easel or I don't know what it is.
Ah, you're right. It could be a canvas. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something.
It looks like they're having a discussion that maybe it's one of them's trying to convince the other of something. There seems a disquiet there. It's not like they're not looking at the nature around them at all.
No, that's a good point. No, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Would you use the term fragile beauty here? Or
Yes.
Do you think the word resilience has any relationship at all?
I don't see resilience.
You don't see resilience? I wondered. And I don't have any thought. I just, I'm thinking of nature as being resilient, because in our next Monday's class, it's 100 years later, and it's a different view.
Oh, sorry,
I also
Francis wanted, okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Helene.
I also find it interesting. I'm having problems with my phone, so the picture cut out as to the sound earlier, and maybe you already discussed it. But I find that the view of the river and the light of the clouds is somewhat different than most paintings. Most paintings have a triangle, and this one does as well, but your eye does not go to the triangle. It goes to the lighter portion on the left-hand side of the painting, rather than to the center, which most paintings have.
That's a
At
very
least my eyes did.
Well, it's a very good observation. And then Priscilla was also saying she noticed the light on the right-hand side of the trees. So you have this tension between our eye being forced down into the water, but pulled back dramatically to the right-hand side of the trees.
That's true.
Now,
Beautiful art, beautiful use of light.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
now, Frances was saying she thought she saw a silo in the distance, but I think it's a church steeple. To me, it looks
Yeah.
like a church steeple, but that might be from driving through New England.
Yes, I would think it was.
Encroachment of civilization.
That's right. That's right. I think that's that. If you were to read a review of this one, that's what the power of his message was. It's so close. And then we move on now. Oh, excuse me. Move on to Albert Bierstadt, another Hudson River artist.
I'm familiar with him, but
You
so
are?
far not the others. Well, the name, I don't know if I could recall his work,
Well,
but I'm familiar with his name.
Well, take a look at this painting and you introduce it to us.
Yeah, well, it's not coming up on my phone. I can't see it yet.
We can't either. This is called Sunset Over the River.
Oh, beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, my.
So we are used to we're used to the three terms: atmosphere, scale, and shadow. So does someone want to just kind of peel apart this painting a little bit? I can open it
Well,
up.
I find that this one and the very first one that was
Helene, I'm afraid we're losing you just with your connection going in and out. So give me just a minute and we'll unmute you and try to go back to you. Maybe somebody else can chime in.
I love the use of the clouds to give you that flowing perspective off to the sun.
Right. The paintings by Albert Bierstadt became very popular with the American public. They're large size, they're beautiful colors, and he took liberty with vivid colors as well as attention to details always in the foreground of his paintings. They were romanticized landscapes. They kind of legitimized the art, American art throughout the world. So as Europeans began to see this art, they recognized that the beauty in America was significantly different than European beauty as portrayed through the eyes of its artists. Untamable beauty of the American West made tangible. You could walk to the edge of this. The style was romantic, almost a religious use of light. His paintings emphasized atmospheric elements like fog, clouds, and mists. And can you see his use of this atmospheric effect again in this painting? These artists all use it. How did he use it here?
Well, the edge of the water, you don't quite know where the water ends and the mountains begin. There's no hard line.
None. And those have to be huge mountains. He painted what he believed the way things should be. So one of his techniques was to shift the foreground to the background quickly. So he gives you a lot of detail up front, very little middle ground, and takes you right into the fog, right into the mist, right into the haze. He painted on enormous sized canvases because he believed, and this is part of the Rocky Mountains that he traveled to, he believed that the beauty of the Rocky Mountains could not be captured on small sized canvases. This particular print, this particular painting is on a canvas over 60 feet square. They were huge. And there's, as you're looking at this, and we'll talk about it in just a bit with these words that I am interested for you to think about: quietly mysterious, contemplative, fragile beauty, forest, stylized light. About 1831, right before this painting was painted, de Tocqueville came out and made an observation. And I want to just read what he wrote about Americans. He said, "In Europe, people talk a great deal of the wilds of America, but the Americans themselves never think about them. They are insensible to the wonders of inanimate nature, and they may be said not to perceive the mighty forests that surround them till they fall beneath the hatchet. Their eyes are fixed upon another sight. The American people views its own march across these wilds, draining swamps, turning the course of rivers, peopling solitudes, and subduing nature." Now, we are about to enter at this time to Manifest Destiny, which was a belief that the Americans had the right to push the Native Americans off the land. They had no right to the land. And America had the right to conquer everything to the Pacific coast. So we have these two forces going on, this rush to colonize everything as far as you could see. And the artists and the writers and the more intellectual saying, not so fast, this is beautiful. And this is what some of these artists tried to capture on this march westward that the Americans took in the middle of the 1800s. Does anyone have any other feelings or impressions as you look at this particular painting and these words we're using?
Yes, I wonder, maybe because of what's going on here right now, had there been a fire there? It looks like those branches on that little inlet have been burnt.
Ah, yes. The branches on the trees that are standing?
No, the part that, and now that I'm looking at it, it's hard because I'm on my phone. Maybe that's a reflection of the tree. The very center in the foreground, is that like an inlet, or is that
Tree.
a reflection of the big tree? Let me see. No, it is not a reflection.
No, it's a dead
It looks
tree
like
that's
the little
fallen
branch-
down.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I see. Yeah, because it looked like, from what I can see, it looked like there'd been a fire there, that they were burnt. But maybe because the tree had fallen, it was dead. So I'm wrong.
I don't think you can be wrong or right when you're looking at, art.
Right.
I have a question. If it's a sunset and it's hitting those trees, why is the shadow in front of it on this side? The shadow on the water of the 4 trees or whatever?
It's reflection.
Shadows. I know it's a reflection, but the sun
Yeah.
is coming from the left. So the shadow should be in back of it, if that's a sunset.
It is.
There is no civilization at all in this painting. There's nothing to indicate man at all. There's no people, there's no cities, there's nothing but
There's
nature.
nothing at all. Nothing.
Kathy, do you think he uses the birds to provide scale?
Huh?
To help us kind of like see how big the trees are, big, give us a point of reference. If you've never, I imagine some of the people who see these paintings had never seen wilderness like this.
Right.
We've all driven around and we've been camping and we've been to, Pam just got back from Montana and we've seen photos, but probably a lot of people at these exhibitions had never experienced anything like the Rockies.
Right. I think he's probably using the birds and he's using the branches
Yeah.
on the dead tree to force our eye into that picture. That is an arrow. Taking with the branches and with the birds, he's moving us into the picture, and I see the reflections on the water, and I think that's an interesting observation made, because those reflections go from bank to bank. So there's a lot of foreshortening going on. There's a lot of helping us view this painting. The foreground is very detailed, little rocks and the path, and we're standing right there. But by the time we look at that sunset, everything is just hazy, and it's a very dramatic sky, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very dramatic. This is Albert Bierstadt.
There's also in the lower left-hand corner, it looks like either wildflowers or it's pretty. It's the same purple that's used way out on the mountains there. Seems to.
So this isn't the East Coast. This is probably the Rocky Mountain area. So what
Yeah.
would that be, sage or something like that?
I don't know. It's in the same color, that sort of that purplish color. Very pretty.
Yes, very pretty.
Was he American? Was he from America, or was he from Germany or Switzerland? The name is German.
He is not American. I think he was born in Germany, and then his family moved here when he was 1 year old. Then he moved back for art education, and then came back to America. This is the middle of the 1800s, so very few people are not immigrants. Most of these artists we're looking at immigrated with families. So let's take a look at a second Albert Bierstadt. And again, as Susan is suggesting, this gentleman, this artist, should be on your list to just take a look at images on Google, because his ability to do magic with light in painting is just stunning. This one is called the Among the Sierra Nevada in California, and it was made in 1868 after the Civil War. And I'm going to hurry along here at 11 o'clock. Again, the themes for these artists was discovery, exploration, and settlement. And you can see that running through the theme of this particular painting. The concepts in this painting: atmosphere, texture, it's sublime. The romanticism influence of beauty and power are revealed in it. Awe and wonder, the beauty of nature and humility before its power. The sublime was achieved in this direct appeal to the senses through the representation of this light.
You see the water coming down.
What?
Water
Yeah.
coming
Yes.
almost.
It's almost God-like.
Yes. Lavender sky, the reflected blue-gray shadow on the left-hand side of the mountain, the fog above the water on the ground between the trees on the right and the waterfall. Shadow reflects the atmosphere and then to the light. Tints and forms are obscured, or the eye is directed from the sun down to the left side of the mountain. You hover over the water and then to the trees on the right and back to the sky, almost a circle. It's a masterful use of light and shadow in atmospheric effect.
Definitely.
It almost seems like fantasy art. You know?
Yes, it does. Now, in this case,
And it seems to me that the animals, the way I can't tell if they're deer or what, but the way that they're standing there, it's almost like in reverence.
Bierstadt is on an expedition to the Rocky Mountains and captured these images among others. And there was a painting by another artist along with him called The Grand Canyon of Yellowstone that gave impetus to moving and creating Yellowstone National Park. So as the artist painted these images, introduced them to the people of the East, a desire to preserve this and a relationship became more profound. Thus, many of our national parks were due to the artists and the photographers at the time who captured this scenery. Yeah, I have to wrap up. Any thoughts on this one?
This one really captures the immense size and scale of the Rocky Mountains. I mean, it just really is breathtaking.
And you wonder what he saw and then transferred this to the paintbrush to create such a glorious picture. And the entire composition forces your eye right to the center. I'm going to move along now because it's a little after 11, and we're just about ready to wrap up. We have two more artists. This is Robert Scott Duncanson, and he's the African-American artist out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And this painting is called The Caves. And if any of you are from the Midwest, the thought is that these caves depict Hocking Hills State Park in Ohio. They are shown with people walking up, climbing up on the right-hand side. And in the center background on the shore are tiny human figures. Duncanson was self-taught. He was a well-regarded landscape painter, which was a monumental accomplishment during the Civil War and Reconstruction period. He adapted many of the same styles that were part of the Hudson River School atmosphere, the sky in the midground and the foreground detail. At first glance, this appears untouched, but then you do begin to see the people moving around the hillside. Cincinnati was a major regional arts center in the mid or later 1800s, where landscape painting flourished because of Ohio's unspoiled terrain at the time. Robert Duncanson had a painting job in his youth, and he became very ill and died quite young as he became older from the influence of lead in the paint at the time. His father was a Canadian Scottish descent and his mother was Black, and he spent his teenage years as a house painter in Monroe, Michigan, but then moved to Cincinnati in 1840s. He's extremely well known in the Cincinnati area as a very accomplished painter, and many of his paintings are in the museums in the Cincinnati area.
I find it kind of interesting that you can see the people on the rocks, but at the very top there's just a face or the head of a man instead of the whole body as the others are.
Where do you see that? Coming out of that rock?
It
Yes.
kind of looks like a carving in the rock.
Right, exactly.
Yes. It's a very good rendition of a juxtaposition of where you are at any given time. You're on a cliff, but way down in the valley are small people in a small river. And then in the midground, you are in kind of a pastoral setting with the trees, and then you go up into the hills and then way up into the sky. So he has you moving around this painting and almost tricking you with the distance, the middle ground, and the foreground.
Yeah.
And if we go to the next one, by Robert Scott Duncanson. This is called On St. Anne's in East Canada. And we've talked through some of the words now associated with the Hudson River School. So I'll have you talk about some of the words like quietly mysterious, contemplative, fragile beauty, delicate lighting, virgin forests, gnarled branches. What do you see in this one? This is by Robert Scott Duncanson, the African-American artist. This is taking place in East Canada.
I love the use of the color.
It's
So
much
more
brighter.
color.
Yeah.
Very,
much.
very vibrant, yeah.
This is another one where they've used those reds and oranges to make the painting so warm and inviting. Just beautiful.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yes.
And the water rushing toward you, I think. It feels like it's rushing toward you.
Yeah. And yet the hills back there are part of the sky again. Very, very, very far away and non-defined.
That's right.
I see
As
in
I said, it looks like autumn.
both of his paintings, I think, have a flat look.
Mhm.
Oh,
Compared to the previous artist, it's simplistic and flat to me, the lighting or the something. It's totally different. I don't think it's quite as realistic as the previous one.
mhm.
I don't appreciate the red, that bright red. I think it's unrealistic looking to me. That's my opinion.
Well,
It
you
does-
might take, excuse me, you might take a look at his Robert Scott Duncanson's images out on Google because his masterpieces are still lifes.
Mm.
So your observation, could have merit because he loved doing still lifes.
It doesn't have a moody mystery like some of the
Yeah.
others. It does not
Yeah.
moody, but you feel like you're present with nature, though. There's the colors are very vibrant, but it's not mysterious.
Right. Let's move to our last one. And if I had to bring a woman in, this is Susie M. Barstow. She was a magnificent painter. Most female members of the Hudson River School related to the male painters as wives, sisters, or daughters. She was one of the few who had no family connection to art whatsoever. She was the daughter of a tea maker and the daughter of a woman who came over on the Mayfield, the boat. Yes, Mayfair. She's said to have climbed more than 110 mountain peaks in her lifetime.
Wow.
She trained as an artist in the Rutgers Female Institute in New York and also in Europe, and she never married and passed away at 87. She exhibited over 75 paintings in the Brooklyn Art Association and the National Academy of Design. She had a very close woman friend, and she and Barstow would sketch and paint on hiking expeditions along the Hudson River and in the surrounding Catskill Mountains. The two women were members of the Appalachian Mountain Club, but also climbed in the Alps and the Black Forest, where they hiked up to 25 miles a day. Very unusual for women at the time. Clothing restrictions were a particular problem for women artists who wanted to work outdoors. The dress code for women included full-length, voluminous hoop skirts, usually made of flammable material, tight bodices, and dainty shoes. Defying all conventions, Barstow solved the problem by shortening her skirts above the ankles, replacing her petticoats with trousers, and wearing firmly tied boots. She also attached rings to her waistcoat so that she could attach her skirts to them, giving her freedom of movement while climbing. The very forward-looking woman. Very mature landscapes. They exuded serenity and are infused with light. Stillness, they were almost spiritual if you were to take a look at the images that she has painted. Her depiction of bodies of water and deserted banks convey a sense of solitude that she must have experienced when she was there. Well-balanced, light-infused compositions follow all the rules of the American Romantic landscape painting of the Hudson River School. And you can see that, can't you? The words we've used in the past paintings apply here. Although women were educated in the arts, being a professional artist in the 19th century was the province of men, really. They were involved in figure drawing classes and different painting classes and attended schools, but they were never regarded as serious artists. And as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't until 2010, 10 years ago, that a movement in a Catskill gallery at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site in the Catskills created an exhibit called Remember the Ladies, Women of the Hudson River School exhibit. So I think there's one more of Barstow's painting called Catskill Creek. And here you'll begin to see her use of light that is in the same spirit of the paintings that we looked at and the use of light in the Hudson River School. You can see, can't you? What do you see in this one? Remember, we're talking about 3 elements of style for the Hudson River School. Atmosphere, scale, and shadow. What do you see?
Well,
The river
definitely,
just draws you into that far, far away background that just goes on forever.
and it dissolves in the atmosphere, like the atmosphere that you're talking about. The hills sort of dissolve
Right.
away. And oh, it's beautiful.
He was masterful with the use of light, just masterful. We're going to close because we're running a little over, but I have 2 questions.
That's okay.
What do these images have in common?
The creek,
Creek.
she depicts creeks in both of them. And did she do that a lot?
She did.
Mhm.
And she also depicted forest as a sanctuary a lot. But let me ask you, because this is our last painting over our series of 12, is there a common thread that struck you personally, each one of you? Something, a word.
For me, it was the scale, the distance that I'm looking on forever.
Mm-hmm. This atmospheric effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, there we go, from Lynn to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Miss-
yes, I think that common thread is the atmospheric light, bringing your eye into the middle of the picture.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think they're all, it's the atmospheric effect that they all have, because your eye comes in and then it goes up into the sky,
Yes.
the clouds, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great deal of detail in many of the paintings, a lot of detail.
In the yes, in the foreground mostly.
Mm-hmm. I think they capture what we lost in some ways, just as some of the writings of Emerson and Thoreau and their walks through nature, they capture when certain buds would occur, when something would occur in nature, and they would write it in their journal. And today, those journals are reviewed by scholars and scientists to determine how have we changed from a climate change perspective. Because in the early 1800s, here's when the first bud arose based on the writing, but here's how it occurred today. So that the cultural writings and the paintings at the time provide scientists with clues as to what we're doing.
I think with all of them, it makes you want to explore and to be there and not, they're not frightening at all. They're some of them are a bit intimidating, but it's still intriguing. I guess that.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, Helene, unmute yourself. There you go. Oh, Helene, you try it again, sweetie. I think you hit it twice.
Unmute.
There you go. You're good.
Thank you. Yes, I find that even though the atmospheric effect is very powerful in almost all of these, I also find that in the foreground, the detail is much more described than the rest of the painting. So your eye gets drawn back and forth, up and down for the atmospheric effect, and then back down to the foreground where all the detail is. I find it a very interesting way to depict what they want to show us.
Right. That's a good point. And then also, isn't it good to know, because you would look at these paintings and think, oh, they're just old, but when you know why they painted them and what they painted and what they techniques and style they used and where they were in history, you have a different appreciation for the art, would you say?
Yes. Oh,
Definitely.
Good. Well, we're going to bid adieu to the Hudson River School, and then next week we'll go forward 100 years and see what the land artist's interpretation is, so you have this perspective of how did this concept of manifest destiny that Americans should conquer, what happened?